so slowly. Okay. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the third panel discussion of the VAICA 2 Festival. VAICA, as you may know, is an acronym for Video Art by Indian Contemporary Artists. VAICA 2 is presented by the Bahaudaji Museum of the city of Mumbai in association with Comet Media Foundation and with the financial support of the Bajaj Group Trust and the Jamnalal Foundation. VAICA 2 is the 2021 edition of the festival. And I'm Chandita Mukherjee, one of the co-curators of the festival with Bharti Kapadia and Jaga, and I make documentary films. As we three curators selected the videos that are on show in this festival, one of the things we start seeing is the varieties of ways that creative people are engaging with the medium of video from many different perspectives. And this is how we came to call the overarching subject of the festival fields of. From underneath the umbrella of the fields of vision emerged 4 fields, interpolations, which we call, for short, art science, body desire, real imagined, and hetero-urban. So these 4 streams form the theme of each week of this 4-week event. Today at midnight, we will reach the end of week festival. And this is themed as Peripheries of the Real. And the discussion to have with 3 of the artists whose work is part of the festival is about videos in Peripheries of the Real. As you listen to the discussion, do jot down the titles of the videos that intrigue you and see them before they vanish at midnight. This evening, we'll be having the concluding panel of Peripheries of the Real with artists Ranbir, Kaleka, Pranay, Dutta, and filmmaker Pranay Basu. And moderating this whole discussion will be curator Akanksha Rastogi of the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art. Ranbir was one of the earliest Indian artists to experiment with video as a form. He grew up in Patiala, Punjab, and after his studies at the Chandigarh, he received a master's degree in painting from the Royal College of Art in London. Ranbir's work reflects a view of the world that plays with the juxtaposition of improbabilities. Into video art is part of his exploration of something he calls a psychological, which takes place outside the physical painting through the use of light to create these. Ranbir's work has been honored with awards exhibited around the world and is collected by museums and collectors in India and abroad. Pranay investigates human-caused dystopias traveling through economic, ecological, and cultural landscapes in his imagination. He is interested in the complex between terrestrial species and landscapes, and his visual language borrows from science, science fiction, architecture, gaming, and cinema to create real worlds and topographies and to generate, worlds which don't exist in real life, but which he creates from his imagination. Pranay has studied painting at the Maharaja Sayaji Rao University in Vadodara, and he's been to several group shows in India and overseas, and he was awarded the INLAC's Fine Arts Award and the Foundation for the Contemporary Arts Emerging Artist Award. Pranay is an alumnus in direction and screenplay writing of the Film and Television Institute of India in Pune. His work engages with the politics of gender and the fragile relationship between nature and humans. His short film Shaki Shona won the Tiger Award for the best show at the International Film Festival Rotterdam in 2017 and screenings and awards at several festivals worldwide. His Palace of Colors premiered at Berlin International Film Festival in 2019. And Prantik's Bela, A Everyday Life in the Village of Bela in West Bengal, was shown as in Vision du Real and at the International Film Festival in Rotterdam, both earlier in 2021. So now I've introduced everybody. Over to Akanksha.
Thank you so much, Chandita. And thank you, Anuj and Bharti and the entire team of VAICA for organizing this tremendous second edition of the festival. At the Kiran Nadar Museum of Art, we had the pleasure of hosting and supporting the inaugural edition of VAICA in New Delhi, physically on site at the museum in 2020, before the pandemic hit. So starting in December 2019 and then ending in January 2019. So it was a completely amazing experience, and it was such a pleasure to host the festival and also see now how it has expanded and grown. So many congratulations once again to all the associated partners and for putting this panel together and inviting me to moderate this. So I have to again say that it's a tremendous feat to see all these amazing videos being put together. And I haven't been able to see all the videos in this amazing set of Peripheries of the Real, but whatever time I've spent with some of the works, one of the thematics, among the Peripheries of the Real and what's being proposed within this set that came out very strongly to me was the question and this idea of landscape, the sheer immensity of landscape and the knowledges and the information embedded, buried in a landscape. I mean, of course, one has to dig out and hear, but all traces are all ever present, the traces of the relation between human and environment, all the entire interaction that happens over a period of time. And of course, landscapes are very complex and layered, and they come together over a period, over a time scale, a very, very long time scale, and also ever changing. There was this one beautiful line that I came across recently, that every landscape has a history, and that history makes every geological event very unique. And also obviously because of the formations, the formations are always shifting, the soil, the air, the wind, the roads, rivers, water, and the relief, and the urban, be it an urban landscape or rural landscape, and with the human intervention, it's always shifting. And so this is one thread that I also found then connecting all our three panelists' works also today, Ranbir, Kaleka, Pranay, Dutta, and Prantik Basu's works. How each one of you are actually dealing and treating the landscape of your choice in one or the other way, with the stories, spectacles, or drama, or the horror of the landscape, and interacting with it. So, and it is quite interesting that how much of our perception of change and also of change of our internal experience is tied to the observable and the communicable changes that are happening to the landscapes around us. So the internal landscape is also, of course, as important. And with that, that got me thinking of Pranay's Datta's video, Moments Before the Fall, which in a way very specifically arranges a kind of an ensemble of digitally crafted catastrophic landscape, if one may say so, placed in a time which of course looks like is before or after human habitation. So from, I don't know if it's the surface of this planet Earth or any other planet, like a science fiction novel. From that surface to the atmospherics, everything seems to be in a process of altering, combusting, churning, and adapting to new conditions. And that made me wonder, what are these new conditions and what are these new time scale we're looking at? So I was quite interested in thinking about landscape as an embedded entity XML file or an HTML file, like with an extension with a dot, like as an embedded entity in the simulated world that you create, Pranay, like, and which is also quite visible out there. You put those put that visuality also as part of the film, as a graphic set, as if landscape as a graphic set in a system. So I was wondering, what are your thoughts on it, and if you want to talk about the process of your video and generating of these landscapes with with codes and numbers.
Sure. Thank you, Akanksha, for that introduction. And thank you, VAICA, for having me on the panel. This particular work, Moments Before the Fall, was sort of done under the 5 million incidents grant by Rux Media Collective and the Goethe Institute. So we were supposed to sort of plan our project based on an incident that would sort of activate a space or create a sense of charge in the atmosphere. So I chose to sort of simulate a cloudburst in this sort of a case. And I was just thinking about the increasing role of AI and data when it comes to governance of policy related to climate change. Like a simple example would be how 3D visualization softwares are used, sort of recreate or depict a catastrophe that has sort of taken place. Like if there's a flash flood that sort of happens, so a 3D visualization on a weather report would be like, this is the source and this is how it sort of impacted the surroundings and stuff. So my attempt was to only use numbers and codes within such a software to generate a cumulonimbus cloud that ultimately sort of deteriorates into a cloudburst. So there were no sort of images imported or modeling done within this project. It was entirely sort of with the help of nodes and simulations, which was sort of pre-programmed within this visualization software, where nature is sort of experienced or imagined with the help of a tutored perceptive machine brain in a way. So I would depend on inputs like wind velocity, wind direction, cloud generation, or downpour velocities, or the area of impact, where this cloud burst was sort of generated. So what you're seeing right now is sort of a condensed version of what the actual project was. Like the actual project was actually an installation that occupied about 6 days. It was distributed over a span of 6 days, and this cloudburst sort of uh, like each day would have different stages of the cloud burst sort of generated over there. So if a viewer sort of came in, they would witness a moment that would not repeat itself, or has not is not going to repeat itself in the future, in those span of 6 days. So the idea was to sort of occupy a space and create an incident and create occupy time in a sense, where I sort of make this cloudburst sort of happen within that space. So yeah, that was what the project was about. So yeah. Akanksha, you're muted, I think.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very interesting that you say that each event and each moment in the sky installation was kind of staged in a way that it was occurring only once, and that's very interesting to my mind as well, because I mean that's real as well as unreal also, it kind of crosses that sort of a one dimensional line, and then to this landscape of this change and rapid change, and this kind of also the climate crisis, which we are also kind of seeing in our own lifetime. I mean, with Ranbir Kaleka's video installation, House of Opaque Water, with that you bring a witness, or one can say a persona of Sheikh Lal Mohan, who has lost his house, his land and village, and also livelihood. And I remember experiencing the entire installation in one of the editions of Kochi Muzras Biennale. I mean, Pranay's installation couldn't see, but yours I have definitely experienced, because that completely changes your interaction with the work if you're seeing it digitally as a video now, as we're seeing Pranay's work. And I mean, so in Ranbir's case, I mean, I very, very clearly remember the experience of feeling submerged. You know, the submergence was very, very strong, and submergence not just of the island, which is submerged underwater because of rising sea level, but also these other movements that were choreographed in the film were also all in relation to the surface of water. You know, so the entire film video moves quite poetically and literally with the water, into the water above it, or from the boat to the boatman to you know, the objects floating. So everything is kind of suggestively nudging, you know, the viewer to float with head above water, or inside, take deep dives and look, and I mean, and in one or the other way, come face to face with this impenetrability of water. So I wanted to ask you about this quality of surface of water, what attracted you, and the submergence, both poetically as well as a real element, like as a threat, danger, life, the way you've treated it.
Akanksha, is it for me or for?
Yes, for you, Ranbir.
Oh, for me. Okay, thank you. Yeah, you know, I'll tell you how this came about, this work. There was some workshop, conference, presentation by scientists, which is called, and artists, which is called Tipping Point in Bangalore. It was organized by Coach, and Pradeep Saha was there, and now he has been working in the Sundarbans as an activist for very long. And so he showed a few of us after the talks and presentations a film that he had made on his computer. It was called Mean Sea Level. So, you know, again, it was play with the word mean, because, you know, it was doing a lot of damage to the islands when it was swallowing them up. But there was one sequence in that which struck me very much, where this man, the protagonist, you know, in my video, where he's saying, "This is my home, and this is where we played," and then he names the houses of his friends, some Hindu, some Christian, Muslim, and then he also pointed out where the church was, where the temple was, where the mosque was, and so on, and also what a fallen tree that he used to play on as a child. And then, but the camera was just on his face, and then when it panned out, we saw that no, there was nothing over there. He was standing in a boat in the middle of the sea. So he was talking about his home, which was under the boat somewhere deep down. Now I thought that was very, very powerful. And so I asked him that, can we meet him? I'd like to work on this further, maybe take it into another space. And he said, sure. So we arranged this shoot in the Sundarbans. Of course, I worked out some ideas on paper, made some notes and so on, and did a teeny bit of research, but really the researcher was Pradeep Saha. I couldn't have anyway done anything more than what he already knew. And then I met him, Sheikh Lal Mohan. I got his name right? You remember his name better than I do, yes. Yeah, it's again a curious mixture of Hindu and Muslim names. You know, there was something interesting. I think it was on television documentary the other day where they were showing Sundarbans. It was a documentary about some events over there. And then we saw that how, there were men in skull caps and they were Hindus, and how they mingled with each other. There seemed to be no difference at all. So it was like an island we wish India was. It was truly beautiful to watch. But anyhow, so we went and met him. And so, because I don't speak Bengali, so I asked Pradeep to ask him if he can take us to the same spot. So he said he sure can. And so this is how that sequence was shot. And now we don't really know if that's the exact spot. But he would say with this certainty, and then move a little forward, move a little to the right. And at a certain point, he said, okay, just stop here. This is where my home is. And I think it doesn't matter if it wasn't quite there, because the home was there in his head, in his heart, and so it existed. So because a real home does not exist anymore, so it becomes real in just his memory. So we went along believing it to be absolutely true, what he was saying. So this is how it began. And about the installation itself, I thought that it had to be, because we spent many, many days over there and being on water as well, that to create an immersive experience, that would be very useful. And so a large projection. So each panel, there are 3 panels. Each panel is 10 feet wide, so about 30 feet across. And so 2 panels are in the front, and the middle one is a few feet at the back. And now that, for me, also creates the third space in the middle. And the projection at the back has also a kind of a black surround around it. It's sort of diffused edges to it. So it is more like the space of a memory, as it were. You're peeking through something. So there I could enter another space of the imaginary. And then we decided that these panels should be on the floor. And also the floor was polished. But sometimes it can get too much polished, it becomes a mirror image. We didn't want that. We wanted more of a ripple, of the reflection coming through. So in some cases it does that, and it becomes very effective. Also, the space where it has to be shown, it shouldn't be too large a space. It needs to be space enough where you seem enclosed on all sides. So this is how it came about. Yeah, and then we started with as the video opens, we started with how I went to his office then here, and of course we recreated that, where I asked him, okay, show me more of the Sundarbans and what material you have. So it began with something actual and some actual conversations and with the real man. But of course, at some point, it goes into this fictive space, which was necessary because, a real documentary really needs much, much more clarity, much more study, much more detail. It has to, and a video can't quite give that. It can give us something else, which a realistic documentary can't, but or does not quite enter that space. We can enter that space, and so what I was interested in was what's happening inside his head, or what it did to his head. So it is more than to trying to recreate a psychological state. And hopefully, if some of that, if the viewers would feel some of that, that was the attempt.
Yeah, that's that fictive space and this psychological state, of course, I mean, came across quite strongly. And for me, the very strong moments in the entire, and one of the strong moments that I very well recall is when the portrait of this man and all, if we can call, is on one of the screens, and then there are these on the other two screens are the portrait of water. I mean, if we can call them a portrait at all, of the site, site of the village, or where his village was submerged, or one can imagine. So, can you talk a bit about your interest in portraits or portraiture in your practice, because that's completely fascinating. And
yeah, I think what portraiture does is there's never a true portrait of the other. There never can be. So, but one tries empathy, and through that empathy, one tries to put a little bit of oneself into the character that one is trying to portray. If you use the word portrait instead of portrait, and then of course one absorbs a little of the other person. A little bit of the other person gets inside you. A little bit of you get into the other. But of course, it's primarily your head which is creating it. So it's more about one's own self, one's own thoughts, and so on. And it can't quite really talk about the other person. One can just imagine still the other person. I pushed him into kind of a state of, one can't say madness, but kind of a feverish dream, as it were. Then when which was my own feverish dream, in a way. But of course, he walks into this mud house on this island where it is about to be swallowed up in a couple of months. And then he finds a pool over there where he dives into it, sinks into it. But then through that, he reaches the sea and then floats over his own village, which again, an underwater currents, or an underwater storm, one can say, rolls over the village. So there are those kind of images, or of course, then there were those people who were losing because I spoke to other villagers as well, and some young boys who had just returned after working in the city elsewhere, in Delhi, Punjab, elsewhere. So they were talking about the cities they had gone to, because there was no work and no more fishing. They couldn't make any money out of fishing anymore. So there was this image of a boatman burning in a boat, which was also one of the sequences. And the other was where he's making a net. But then his fingers continue to move, but the netting disappears from his fingers, but out of habit, and there's nothing else he can do. That's the only thing he knew. So there were some of those things. And then in an open ground, there's something glistening far away amongst the electrical poles. When you walk near, there's that glistening thing is a fish struggling to breathe, and it dies away. That's all these. And because something like this, I like to invent events. And by events, this is to make meaning through events. This I do in my painting as well. And I know, in recent times, a lot of those work, if one Googles my name, those digital collages come up. Those are not the ones which are closest to me. They, how I started making those they were made for charity in the beginning. Of course, the first one I had made for for a for a gallery show or on photography, because Peter wanted me to do some photography. But anyway, because I'm not a photographer, so I cobbled something together.
Yeah, on this.
And-
on this
Yeah, it was called Cobbler as well, where I photographed a cobbler around the corner. And so those are, but I continue to make them because a painting takes many months, 6 months, 8 months. Sometimes I've taken up a year or longer. So those I just couldn't make for charity to give away. So this was easier for me and a little playful as well. So I enjoy it a little. But that's not me. That doesn't contain these feverish dreams. That doesn't contain those events. But they're stories though, because I love stories as well. So I create little stories, but they become a bit like some of them becomes little fairy tale sort of stuff. But anyhow, yeah, that's it.
And this idea of inventing in events, I think, on that note, I would like to go back to Pranay again. Pranay, are you there?
He'll be back in a minute.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
There he is.
Yeah, so maybe you'll join back again and we can move.
I'm here. Hello.
Okay. We can't see you though.
You can't?
No, we can hear.
We can hear you. We can hear. Oh yes, yeah, you're back. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Lovely. Yeah, so like what Ranbir was talking about, inventing events. Your Cloudburst is also an invented event. I was curious about the installation format, which I wasn't aware of actually before seeing the video at all. That it pre-existed as a spatial work. And in a very different format. Maybe if you can talk a bit about how important that structure or spatial dynamics of it was to you, and also what kind of selection or editing choices you made in the version that you've chosen for this festival, to show at this festival.
So basically, the installation that was there, it was like the video, it was kind of stretched out, like like how time is sort of stretched. So it was very slow in those terms. So the video kind of panned out for like about 6 days. So like the first day there would be like a walkthrough of the space, like very slow walkthrough of the space. The second day would witness like the wind sort of like coming in. And then the third day there would be like a sort of cloud generation that sort of happens, and then the fourth day there was like a cloud burst that sort of takes place, and then eventually it sort of leads to a flooding of the entire sort of landscape that's there. And this was kind of installed in this space like in Siddhartha Hall in National Bhavan in Delhi. So it was like this extremely dark space, like a dark room was created out of it, like there was no light sort of coming in from anywhere, and it was like a wall-to-wall projection of it. And one could just come and just sit down, just like be within the space and sort of observe what are these sort of changes that are happening very slowly. So every time somebody would come, like like they would be like they would be privy to a situation that probably hasn't happened before, or is not going to repeat itself further on in the thing. So if you're there in the moment, that is exactly what you're viewing and that is exactly what you're experiencing, and then it changes, like the entire simulation sort of changes the very next day you drop by. So that was the entire idea behind it, like sort of how do I sort of make this cloudburst occupy that dark room and occupy time in a sense, like how would you experience time and cloudburst sort of taking place. So cloudburst is something that sort of occupies time in a way, like it's not something that can happen within 6 minutes or like 7 minutes. So it was something that I felt like could be stretched and could be experienced in that sort of a 6-day format. So that's like how I kind of put it forward.
And the editing for this particular version,
and
because it seems definitely very accelerated, like you're experiencing a gist.
I did want to also make a video format of it, like where it's a continuous process of how it sort of disintegrates into a cloudburst. So I kind of chose the highlights of each day, like the highlights from the walkthrough or the highlights from like the wind generation. So all of that kind of put together. So I kind of edited it that way and brought it together in like a much more condensed, brief format in order to make a video out.
But do you miss something in it?
Yeah, the aspect of time is obviously missing. The aspect, and also like viewing it on a computer is a very different experience, and viewing it like on such a large scale is very like it was like a wall-to-wall projection, so it was kind of engulfing the viewer in a sense. So you're kind of surrounded by that format. So yeah, that was missing, but then again, like the time aspect kind of played around. Yeah.
Hmm.
I think these the phenomena in nature, is also this is very powerful and a great tool for an artist to also reflect on psychological states. When we say the earth is in distress, I think when we show that, there's our own psychological state as well. So cloudburst becomes many things. It's
definitely. And this cloudburst, and I mean, maybe on that note, we can move to Prantik. His film Hawa Mahal was simple narrative and quite beautiful, and one, I mean, on here in Pranay and Ranbir's case, we see a different kind of a submergence or immersive aspect. And here, your world is in Hawa Mahal is full of promise of emergence, or some emergent structure, a house or a urban space or a building is going to come up, because I mean the film is centered around this brick making factory, and so there's a promise of these emergent structures around, which I found quite fascinating. And as one also moves out from metropolis and moves towards the rural areas, often now you see there are these easy markers and turns as one moves. You see lines of eucalyptus trees and these brick making factories, and I think that's a defining feature now of these large area clearings happening and turned into these large eucalyptus plantations, because of course eucalyptus is a tree that grows very fast in comparison to others, but is also banned in several areas. So, I mean, I wanted to ask if you have any responses to this idea of landscape and the way you also invoke it in your work, in your film. And for me, that entire sequence of where eucalyptus trees are lined up in the backdrop, and then there is this geometrically aligned raw bricks. I mean, that's very, very telling. Both of them are actually heavily water demanding activities, and I mean, deplete the groundwater. I mean, we all know the problems of eucalyptus plantations. Yeah.
Hi, hello everyone, and thank you for having me. So water, I think, is a common theme in many of the films, in many of the works in this section. And what I was particularly interested in, or generally my interest lies in this idea of thresholds or borders between two opposing things, like be it day and night, or urban and rural setting, or human-made and natural settings. So this was a premise that was automatically there in the landscape. And also I made this film it was kind of a workshop film for the students at the institute in Rohtak. So I went there for a brief period of time, and we were supposed to make a film with a few students there. So I was new to the place, I was an outsider. And as Ranbir was saying some time ago, that for a documentary, you need to spend a lot of time to understand the place and the nuances of the place. we didn't have that time, unfortunately. And we wanted to do an observational portrait of the place, not a conventional documentary as such, but through visuals, through sound, through landscape, what story can be told. And my work is also more towards filmmaking than video art. So this is more narrative driven in that way. And whereas in the filmmaking setup, this is more of I don't know, abstract film, because there's no dialogues or no central characters taking it forward. So the landscape in a way becomes the central protagonist in this film. And it started with that half looking building at the horizon, which is actually a sports stadium. It somewhere looks half built, but that's how it's shaped. And this idea of in Invisible Cities, where we read about cities becoming similar one after the other, is something that I was influenced by or inspired by. And when we go to these settings, it almost becomes like one territory encroaching into another, and there's a blurring of lines between them. And within this cycle of one day, we try to create how like creation and destruction together can be balanced out. Like when the storm comes, it's almost like all encompassing. It feels like everything will die down. And then again, that fire is seen where the workers are working at the brick kiln. And again, there'll be a regeneration of things and the work will continue. So this blurring lines between urban spaces and rural spaces and how one eats up into the other is something that I was interested in. It's interesting you mentioned brick kilns and the eucalyptus plantation, because they both have a commercial purpose to it. And the nature that we see there is also almost tamed and created for a certain purpose of us. And to encapsulate that, we tried to use some cinematic tools such as the verticals of the trees were put in contrast with the horizontal movements of the tracks. And so the x-axis and y-axis create a certain orientation when viewing. So those were the tools that we were using to dramatize it in terms of engagement. And more than telling, or of course, we all know about gentrification. We know about the problems of these things that it poses to the climate. Instead of being didactic, I just wanted to present through the images the feeling that evokes these fears or these uncertainties that we are living in a way. So that was the attempt. And also to make it within a one-day cycle was to take it to a certain level of abstraction where we see everything within that one drop, like the creation and the destruction. So, of course, it is fictionally created. We make it one day. Really, it was the storm happened in one day and we shot the other aspects. It was towards building up towards that storm, and after that it settles down and how life resumes after that. We called it Hawa Mahal because we were looking at all those establishments of the places we know of, the palaces or the castles we have in India. And also these are castles in the air in a way, and it goes beyond the human living condition, human living on earth or before or after, how things get destroyed and degenerate and regenerated after is something that we were trying to encapsulate in the film.
Thank you for elaborating so beautifully about your process. Were there any interactions with the locals also involved in about this at all, or?
With the locals, we were interacting in terms of, because we were there for a week or 10 days, it was mostly about doing the recce. So during the recce, we interacted with the people at brick kiln and of course the plantation. And we were working with one family at the brick kiln, the woman whose hands we see, and her husband was there and the daughter. So we did not get into their personal stories, even though we were talking to them, but we knew that won't be a part of the film. That was not the film we were aiming at, to bring out individual stories. We knew the limitations of making a film like this within a span of 1 week, where we had to shoot, edit, and submit the film. It was like a film school project kind of a thing. So getting into personal narratives was not something we were aiming at. We were looking at mostly forms and patterns in the landscape itself to bring out the story, and so that the human beings become one of the many elements of the story and not become the core of the storytelling. Also in filmmaking, we have placed humans at the core like most of the films we see these days, they have human protagonists, but in my practice, I sometimes try to break away from that and put humans and like plants or like the other elements of nature in the same like circle where they are all are different planets in the same solar system and not put them at the center. So yeah.
We have a question for you from our audiences, particularly about the soundtrack. So maybe I'll read that out. So the question is, I couldn't help noticing the audio cuts that matched the visual cuts with barely any sound overlaps, almost as though you were deliberately working against the spatial unity of the place, the village. It started becoming parametric in a most absorbing way and ironically served to draw in rather than distance for me. Could you talk about the sound design? Also, I'm just curious, were all the ambiences real or recorded for the shots?
So all the ambiences were real, and that's a very interesting question. Actually, this is something we were consciously thinking while when we started editing the film. These places are very quiet and serene with sounds of cricket or birds. There was a certain sense of peace and lull to the images, even though we wanted that dreamlike quality of this land surveyor who is traveling with the theodolite, and it's almost like he's in an afternoon nap and where he dreams of his village momentarily. Even though we wanted that dreamlike quality, we did not want this film to be a very soothing film because it is a sort of a disturbing setting, this contradiction or this conflicting borders of these regions. So the sharp cuts in sound was a conscious decision to, in a way, pull back the audience also from the lull that is created with the wind or with the birds and crickets. So to almost like waking up to it every time we are settling in to take the joy or the pleasure of the soothingness of it. So we want to break that in every step and also to build up towards the storm, because that is where it almost the dusts swirl up to create a huge catastrophe like ending. So a build up towards that was required, and that way cutting every sounds with every shot was giving a momentum to the story to go ahead. And yeah, they were all recorded on location, and most of them are entirely location sounds with very little designing done.
The next question is from Bharti for Pranay. Was the landscape we see entirely generated? I was intrigued by the points where the landscape, which we otherwise assume to be planetary surface, is seen from above as a rectangle in space.
Yeah, so like when you generally sort of intend to create a landscape on a 3D visualization software, like it comes off as a plane. Like it's a rectangle that you sort of create, and it was like sort of generated just within the software. So there was like I would input like numbers, and they would get interpreted as height maps in a way, which would create like the displacements within the rectangular form of landscapes. And that's how the landscapes was sort of generated, although it looks very much like reference from the real, like, you know, there's like this cliff-like looking structure that there's like water, but it was entirely like numerically generated within the software. Yeah.
And what you have at the back, and I'm curious about your backdrop. Is that a painting from the same landscape?
Yeah. No,
is that
that's
a painting
that's,
or a
that's a painting. That's a painting that's going on right now.
Okay. Of the same landscape. Okay. But that question was from Smriti, not from Bharati. And she has another question for Ranbir. She's asking if was the use of the same image laterally inverted on either side of the central panel intended to have a meaning or evocation beyond the compositional?
Yeah, I think what it does when we look at images, the way they are placed. So if an image is multiplied, so what is compositional also, affects us. It is it creates it's not without generating a certain feeling of a certain kind. And if it's doubled, for instance, there is image on the left and the right. But in a lot of cases, like when the protagonist is in the boat and he's making gestures, he's both on the left and the right. But they're not mirror images. They're different little clips which are put together. So it also creates a kind of sense of immensity in it. And there would be perhaps one or two images where the same is repeated, but I can't quite recall which one that would be. But it's also then when one would like the focus to be, the boat one is, of course, where the burning boat is. But then also I wanted the focus also to go on the face of the protagonist in the middle. So you don't move your head right to left to right, but the intensity on the man's face and what might be going in the head as one would do in a portrait. I think the best portraits are those where one begins to think or one begins to see a thinking head, that there is what thoughts are going on in this head of the sitter, of the person being portrayed.
Yeah, thank you for those responses. You all must have also seen works of other artists. Were there any works that you were able to resonate with or respond to in relation to your own practice, or had questions for?
I have to admit, I couldn't. I wasn't too well earlier, so I was able to just see Pranay's and Prantik's work. Today, I've not been able to find any time. Time in the sense I wasn't too well.
So I kind of did resonate with Devadeep Gupta, who had these two videos called Absent River and The Normalization of a Disaster. So like, I felt like there were much needed social issues that, sort of failed to get the recognition that it sort of deserves. Both the Majuli flooding and also the Baghjan oil fire, which have like sort of tremendous environmental impacts in a way. And more so, it was sort of executed with a cinematic brilliance. Like I felt the shots were very well crafted, and they were like powerful visuals that sort of put forth the scale and emotional value across very efficiently. Like for example, in Absent River, I felt like Devdeep sort of beautifully depicted the struggle and helplessness of the inhabitants of the coastal ecology. And the primary shot where like Devdeep is trying, like the potters are trying to assemble a wall with the horizon in the background, felt like a very layered image. It sort of showed their attempts to build an embankment or a form of resistance to the river, despite their inevitable failure in the end. And the idea of sort of home and belonging was constantly questioned. It was a constant state of inquiry in the film. So both through narration and also like there were like these still photographs in that video, like which sort of really remained with me. Like one of them was like the comb, sort of like the imprint of a comb on the sand, and also the buffalo sort of stuck in the mud pit. So I really sort of resonated with that. And also the Baghjan oil fire, like this sort of incident took place in 2020 last year, and it sort of projected a state of being, a sense like, and it's also sort of established a sense of friction where between the natives and outsiders, like how does perceptiveness of an ecological dystopia differ for a native versus an outsider? It's sort of like every time we do encounter a dystopic visual as an outsider, like there's a marvel and awe, right? Like, like, whoa, like what's happening? But like the moment you're a native, like it sort of creates like how's it different for a lived experience of it? Like, you know, it's rather grim, it's sort of inconvenient for the natives of the land who might have to leave their home and belonging and conform to a displaced state. So that was very, very interesting for me. And also in like, I felt like Sir's work, like about Sundarban, had links with like the Absent River because they both talk about like these coastal ecologies and the sort of relationship that man has with water out there, like that human being has with water out there. There's this constant, tension where they do depend on the water for their livelihoods, but at the same point of time, the water is sort of depriving them of their livelihood at the same point of time because of the kind of ecological disaster that is going on there. And yeah, so and it's interesting to look at like Sundarbans in specificity because like geological processes that take like sort of years to transpire in Sundarbans, it happens overnight. So like, you know, like overnight there'll be like a chunk of land that sort of, you know, disappears, like, you know, it'll just be eaten away or wiped out, you know. So it was like that link was very interesting for me. And also again, like the idea of home and belonging in Sundarban is again sort of a factor there. And I particularly like that underwater scene in where like these prototypes of the village, like these maquettes were sort of kept underwater, and there was like this sort of washing away of that underwater. So that was pretty cool.
Thank
Yeah.
you. What is that work called? Sorry, the one you were talking about, the other work.
There's Devdeep
If you,
Gupta,
I missed the title. Sorry.
Absent River by Devdeep
Absent
Gupta.
River. Okay.
He talks about this village in Majuli, which is also like very like which is also frequented by floods,
Okay.
Brahmaputra River sort of. So they had like links there. So yeah,
Okay.
that was interesting.
Yeah. No, I liked both Prantik and Pranay's work. But there's nothing I can't compare with any others which I saw. But liked both of them. And the which section is that in? Which the is it in this grouping where?
Yeah,
Are,
it's in this
in this very grouping. Okay, all right. Okay. I'll look it up. Yes. So, Prantik, has your work been then screened as well, like larger?
I mean, mostly at film festivals, but yeah, some of my works have been projected at gallery spaces and on loop. Yeah. On installations, but I haven't worked with multiple channel yet. So I'm very fascinated by that idea. And when I saw your film also, I felt, I had one question for you, sir, actually, that the version we see here, is it recorded on the site or is it generated to be a video?
So we took the actual shot. This was in Singapore Museum. And then, but it wasn't very clear. So then we had to sort of superimpose the same in that space. Yeah.
Because the reflection that you were talking about, that looks real and unreal, which adds like so much to the film.
They worked beautifully in the Singapore Museum.
I'm sure it must be so powerful to see live.
Worked very well over there. And Pranay, you haven't thought of surrounding the three walls around you with your projections?
No, so far I have not. I've always stuck to like a rectangular format.
If it's not, I think what could also work if it's a semicircle.
Yeah, sort of like.
Yeah. And so I think projectors these days, you can sort of
have a curved projection.
Seamlessly, put them together. So because this is not a work that one has to just see in one spot, one can turn its back to one side and still experience and be very effective, I think. But also visually, both the Prantik's and Pranay's work are beautiful visually.
Great. So I'm just being mindful of time. So yeah, so if anyone has any further questions to add, we can otherwise call it a day. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Akanksha, Pranay, Prantik.
Thank you. So nice talking to you guys.
Lovely talking to all of you and learning more, more dimensions of all your works. Chandita, over to you then.
Thank you, Akanksha, for your moderation of this whole evening's conversations. And Ranbir, Prantik, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts and experiences and listening to your observations on your own work, especially the way each of you relates differently to this question of the scale of the human environment was quite exciting. And questions like, how does the visual of a dystopic situation of an ecological disaster look to the people native to that environment, as against the passing visitor who may sensationalize certain aspects? These are important issues, and I'm glad you touched on that, Pranay. In closing, I'd also like to thank the Jamnalal Bajaj Foundation and the Bajaj Trust, as well as Kasim Mehta and the Baudaji Lal Museum for making this whole festival possible. Next, please come and watch the next set of videos under the theme of urban heterotopias. This will be on view from midnight tonight and will be up for the whole week. And we'll have another discussion like this on Saturday, the 18th at 7 p.m. And this will be a panel, so please don't miss it. Thank you. Thank you.